It was a bright, sunny morning, and the streets of the city were slowly coming to life. Cars moved steadily along the avenues, and the soft hum of traffic mingled with the occasional chirping of birds. In the midst of this everyday rhythm, a woman drove calmly in her black sedan, heading toward the courthouse. She carried herself with quiet confidence, a sense of purpose in the way she held the steering wheel and glanced occasionally at the rearview mirror. Her hair was long and neatly kept, cascading over her shoulders, a reflection of the care she put into her appearance despite the demanding nature of her work. She was on her way to attend a few early hearings, her mind rehearsing the details of the cases she would oversee that day. There was a mix of anticipation and focus in her demeanor, but also an underlying serenity that came from years of experience in handling difficult situations. She had learned that the world often misjudged her at first glance, but she had grown accustomed to carrying herself with dignity, letting her actions speak louder than assumptions. On a parallel street, two patrol officers were making their morning rounds. They chatted casually, sipping from their coffee cups, discussing minor details of their last shift. Their conversation was light, but there was an undercurrent of fatigue and routine that made them a little careless in their approach. They had been on the force for several years and had encountered countless situations. Yet a sense of boredom sometimes led to lapses in judgment. As fate would have it, the woman's path intersected with theirs at a busy intersection. For no significant reason, the officers decided to pull her over. She complied without hesitation, slowing her car and rolling down the window with a polite greeting. Her voice was calm, steady, and respectful, yet firm enough to convey that she was not someone to be easily intimidated. There was an unmistakable aura of authority in her presence, but the officers, absorbed in their routine, did not immediately register it. One of the officers approached the driver's side, squinting in the morning sun, and asked for her license and registration. She handed them over promptly, her hand steady, and offered a friendly smile. The officer examined the documents, glancing from the papers to her face, and for a brief moment there was a flicker of recognition, quickly dismissed as he focused on minor details he considered irregular. He asked a few standard questions, attempting to maintain a tone of casual authority, but there was an underlying rigidity that suggested a readiness to assert control. The woman responded with measured answers, her voice never rising, her tone never losing its calm. She answered each question clearly and concisely, showing patience that could have diffused tension in most situations. But the officers, slightly distracted and perhaps too accustomed to making snap judgments, continued to scrutinize her. There was a subtle tension building, though it was not immediately apparent to passersby. It was the kind of tension that grows slowly, like the quiet before a sudden storm. Then, seemingly without a clear reason, the officers made a comment about her hair. It was light-hearted in tone, but carried an undercurrent of disrespect. They joked about how long it was and whether she would be willing to have it trimmed on the spot. The woman, maintaining her composure, responded politely but firmly, indicating that she valued her personal space and autonomy. There was a quiet power in her demeanor, a sense that she would not allow herself to be belittled or humiliated. However, the officers, caught in the moment of their own misguided bravado, pressed further. They suggested in a way that was meant to be humorous but came across as intrusive that they could take a few strands to teach her a lesson. She did not respond with anger. Instead, she remained composed, watching them carefully, her eyes conveying calm but unmistakable authority. It was a test of character. She had no intention of escalating unnecessarily as they lingered by the car. Examining her license and discussing among themselves, the woman's mind stayed sharp. She noticed small things, the slight hesitation in one officer's voice, the other fidgeting with his pen, the way they avoided looking directly at her face for too long. She realized that they were underestimating her, assuming she was just another motorist, another routine stop in a city that demanded constant vigilance. Yet, she also knew that confrontation in the wrong tone could lead to unnecessary trouble, so she chose patience and precision over impulsive reaction. Minutes passed, which felt longer than they were, and the subtle tension in the air grew heavier. Pedestrians moved along the sidewalk, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding in the parked car. Inside, the woman's thoughts were focused, not on retaliation, but on observation. She mentally noted each detail: the way the officer's badge glinted in the morning sun, the slightly crooked placement of his hat, the faint scent of coffee lingering around them. She cataloged everything, aware that every interaction, no matter how minor, could have implications later. The officers, meanwhile, were caught in their own small world of misplaced authority. They believed they were handling a routine situation, a minor disturbance that required attention. They laughed quietly between themselves, still referencing her hair, making light comments they assumed were harmless. But there was a subtle miscalculation. They were unaware of the woman's true identity and the weight of her authority. They did not realize that the person sitting calmly in that car was someone who could influence their careers and reputations in a way they could not anticipate at one point. The woman gently reminded them of the time, subtly indicating that she had appointments to keep. Her tone was polite but firm, a soft yet unmistakable assertion of her own time and responsibilities. The officers, momentarily taken aback, chuckled nervously, sensing that their easygoing attitude might not be appropriate. But the familiarity bred by routine made them overconfident once again, leading to further comments that bordered on condescending. The air was charged with a mix of humor and tension. To an observer, it might have seemed like a trivial interaction, a small moment in the flow of a busy morning. But for the woman and the officers, it was a pivotal encounter. Each side was testing boundaries in different ways, she with calm observation and quiet authority, they with misplaced bravado and assumptions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of subtle negotiation and quiet standoffs, the woman gently requested that they complete their inspection quickly. She maintained eye contact, her expression serene but unwavering. There was no trace of fear, no hint of panic, just a quiet insistence that the situation be handled with professionalism. The officers, sensing the undercurrent of authority they had failed to recognize, began to hasten their actions, fumbling slightly as they returned her documents, as she prepared to drive away. She exhaled softly, a silent acknowledgement of the minor ordeal she had endured. Her composure remained intact, her dignity unshaken. She understood the subtle lessons in human behavior that every day offered, the ways people misjudge and underestimate one another. And while this encounter had been challenging, it was also a reminder of her own resilience. The quiet strength that had carried her through years of scrutiny and responsibility. Driving away, she merged back into the flow of traffic, the morning sun reflecting off her car. Casting a warm glow on the polished surface, she was ready to face the day's challenges, to oversee the cases before her with fairness and authority. Aware that her influence extended far beyond this one street, one minor misunderstanding. Yet even in her reflections, there lingered a subtle awareness that this encounter was only the beginning of a story that would test not just patience, but the understanding of respect, authority, and the consequences of assumptions. The morning had already started with an unusual tension, but what happened next took the interaction to a completely new level. As the officers continued their inspection, one of them, feeling emboldened by the lack of immediate resistance, made a comment that was meant to be teasing but carried an edge of disrespect. He gestured toward her hair and suggested with a smirk that a few strands could be taken as a reminder of their authority. The comment lingered in the air, sharp yet absurd, and the woman's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in a quiet assessment of the situation. She understood that this was not just a careless remark. It was a test, a challenge in disguise. The officers, caught up in their own sense of control, did not realize that their words and actions would have consequences far beyond what they could imagine. They assumed she would react the way most people would either, with panic, submission, or argument. But they were mistaken. There was a depth to her composure, a reservoir of patience and self-assuredness that they had not accounted for. The woman remained seated in her car, her hands resting gently on the steering wheel, her eyes steady and unwavering. She spoke in a calm, measured voice, reminding them politely that such behavior was unnecessary. Her tone was gentle, but it carried an unmistakable weight, a subtle command that drew their attention without needing to raise volume or anger. The officers paused for a moment, realizing that she was not intimidated and that their joke had not landed as intended. Despite this, one of the officers, still convinced of his control over the situation, reached closer, as if to demonstrate dominance. He tried to ruffle her hair lightly, intending to provoke a reaction. The woman did not flinch. Her calmness was disarming. The confidence in her eyes communicated that she was fully aware of her rights and her authority. It was not fear that stopped the officer from going further, but a slow dawning awareness that this was not a situation to handle casually. The street around them continued with its ordinary rhythm. Cars passing by, pedestrians walking on the sidewalks, and the city alive with its morning energy. None of them noticed the subtle power struggle occurring at that corner, where authority and respect were being tested in quiet ways. It was a situation that required patience, observation, and careful navigation. And the woman understood this better than the officers. She took a deep breath, choosing her next words with care. Rather than reacting with confrontation, she reminded them politely that she had important work to attend to, and that this interaction needed to be respectful and professional. Her voice, soft yet firm, carried the weight of experience, of countless situations where calm reasoning had achieved more than anger or force. The officers, sensing a shift in the dynamics, exchanged nervous glances, realizing for the first time that their assumptions had been premature. At that moment, the woman's hand rested briefly on a folder sitting on the passenger seat beside her. Inside were documents pertaining to her upcoming hearings, cases that had required hours of preparation and careful thought. The officers, unaware of the significance, noticed the folder but did not grasp its meaning. Their curiosity led them to ask about it casually, thinking it was just paperwork, another detail of an ordinary life. She responded politely, explaining it contained her professional materials, her duties for the day, her responsibilities as a judge. Her words, while simple, carried an authority that they could not ignore. There was a sense of calm command in the way she spoke, a quiet power that made the officers pause. They were beginning to sense that this interaction was not routine, and that the woman before them was someone with influence, someone who could hold them accountable in ways they had not anticipated. But the realization was slow. Their behavior still carried traces of their earlier arrogance. As the conversation continued, the woman's posture remained composed, her demeanor unwavering. She listened carefully to the officers' questions, answering each one with clarity and precision, never raising her voice or showing irritation. Her calmness was disarming, and there was a subtle lesson being conveyed in every gesture and every word. She demonstrated that strength did not always require force, and that dignity could be more commanding than aggression. One officer, still struggling with the shift in dynamics, tried to defuse the tension with humor. He made another remark about her hair, attempting to return to the earlier teasing tone, but it fell flat. The woman smiled politely, a smile that was courteous yet edged with quiet authority. There was no confrontation, but there was a clear message. She was not someone to be trifled with, and respect was expected in her presence. The situation, already tense, began to attract subtle attention from the surrounding environment. People passing by may not have noticed the details, but there was a sense in the air, a faint tension that made the moment stand out from the ordinary morning. The woman, fully aware of her surroundings, maintained her focus on the officers, her composure never wavering. She understood that every small action mattered, that patience and observation were more powerful than immediate reaction. Minutes stretched longer than they should have. Each moment weighted with unspoken assessment and quiet negotiation. The officers were learning, albeit slowly, that their assumptions had been wrong. The woman's calm authority was reshaping the interaction, subtly but unmistakably. They began to realize that they were no longer in a position of control. She had the upper hand not through aggression, but through poise, intellect, and measured presence. Finally, one of the officers, with a mix of hesitation and embarrassment, stepped back slightly, acknowledging the unspoken boundaries that had been clearly established. The woman, noticing this, remained composed, her calm gaze conveying that the situation could proceed smoothly if respect was maintained. She had not raised her voice, had not demanded compliance, yet her authority was unmistakable. The officers returned her documents with a newfound awareness, a quiet acknowledgement of the misstep they had made. The woman nodded politely, offering a gesture of courtesy and patience, signaling that the encounter could end professionally without further escalation. Her demeanor was a reminder of the power of calm, thoughtful action, and the importance of observing before acting as she prepared to leave. The officer's earlier bravado had dissipated, replaced by a subtle respect and cautiousness. They realized that their assumptions, their casual arrogance, and their impulsive comments could have consequences beyond what they had imagined. The woman, serene and composed, merged back into the flow of traffic, carrying herself with dignity, her mind already shifting back to the responsibilities awaiting her at the courthouse. The morning continued, the city alive with its usual rhythm, but for the officers, the encounter would linger in their minds. They had underestimated her, misjudged her presence, and now they were faced with the realization that authority and respect are earned not through force or jokes, but through calm confidence and unshakable composure. The woman, meanwhile, drove on, her thoughts focused on the day ahead. Knowing that this minor confrontation had tested patience, resilience, and the quiet power of professionalism, it was a small incident in the grand scheme of life. Yet it carried lessons that would not be forgotten. A reminder that dignity and calm authority can command respect in ways that arrogance never can. After the tense exchange on the street, the woman continued her drive toward the courthouse. But the memory of the encounter lingered in her mind. She reflected on the subtle arrogance of the officers, how easily they assumed control without considering the consequences of their actions. It was not anger that filled her thoughts, but a focused awareness. A reminder of how often people misjudge situations and individuals based on appearances alone. She knew the encounter could have escalated if she had reacted differently, but her calm approach had maintained control and dignity. As she approached the courthouse, she noticed the familiar bustle of people entering the building. Lawyers carrying stacks of papers, clerks moving briskly from one office to another, and the general hum of activity that marked the start of a busy day. She parked her car and walked inside with the same quiet authority she carried everywhere. Her steps were measured, her presence commanding respect without demanding it. Colleagues and staff greeted her politely, acknowledging her position with subtle nods and courteous smiles. She returned each greeting with warmth and composure, aware that professionalism and kindness often leave a more lasting impression than mere authority. Inside her chambers, she opened her briefcase and began reviewing documents for the cases scheduled that day. There were motions, evidence summaries, and legal briefs that required careful attention. Each case demanded a clear mind and focused judgment. As she read through the files, she reflected on the earlier incident with the officers. It was a minor interruption in her day, but it underscored the importance of patience and composure in dealing with people who underestimated her. She understood that authority was not just a title. It was a responsibility to guide, assess, and lead with fairness and clarity. Meanwhile, back on the street, the officers were left to process what had happened. They returned to their patrol car, the earlier confidence replaced by a mixture of embarrassment and contemplation. They replayed the encounter in their minds, realizing how easily they had misjudged someone based solely on her appearance and the assumptions they had made. One of the officers shook his head, murmuring that he had underestimated the situation completely. The other nodded in agreement, feeling the weight of unspoken accountability. It was a lesson they would not forget, one that challenged their understanding of respect and authority. Back at the courthouse, the woman prepared for her first hearing. She organized her notes, reviewed the case files, and mentally rehearsed the points she needed to address. Her focus was unwavering, her mind sharp and ready to assess every argument and piece of evidence presented. She knew that each decision she made could impact lives, influence outcomes, and shape the course of justice. It was a responsibility she carried with pride and diligence. Always mindful of the ethical and human dimensions of her work, the courtroom began to fill with people, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Lawyers whispered among themselves, witnesses nervously adjusted their seating, and clerks prepared documents and evidence for presentation. The woman took her seat at the bench, her posture upright and composed, projecting authority and calm. She glanced around the room, making brief eye contact with those present. silently conveying that she was observant and fully engaged in the proceedings. As the hearing commenced, she listened attentively to the arguments presented by both sides. Each word, each piece of evidence, and each question posed to witnesses was considered carefully. She maintained a neutral demeanor, ensuring fairness and impartiality, while also being mindful of the human elements involved. Her tone was measured, her questions clear and precise, reflecting her deep understanding of the law and her commitment to justice. Throughout the hearing, she occasionally recalled the encounter with the officers. It was not in anger or resentment, but as a reminder of how easily people could misjudge authority and underestimate others. She recognized that patience, observation, and composure were not just valuable in the courtroom, but in everyday life as well. The ability to navigate challenging situations with grace and intelligence was a skill honed over years of experience and careful reflection outside the courthouse. The officers continued their patrol, their thoughts returning to the incident repeatedly. They discussed the encounter, analyzing their actions and words, and slowly began to understand the implications of their behavior. One remarked that it was a humbling experience, a reminder that authority is not about intimidation or force, but about responsibility, respect, and measured judgment. The other officer agreed, acknowledging that they had learned a valuable lesson about perception, humility, and the importance of not jumping to conclusions. Back inside, the hearing progressed smoothly. The woman guided the proceedings with clarity and focus, ensuring that all parties were heard and that the rules of the court were followed meticulously. Her questions were thoughtful, her observations precise, and her decisions reflected careful consideration of both legal principles and the human impact of each case. The courtroom atmosphere was one of respect and attention, shaped in large part by her calm and authoritative presence. During a brief recess, she reflected quietly in her chambers. She considered the broader lessons of the morning, how small encounters could reveal much about human behavior, assumptions, and the importance of respect. The incident with the officers, though minor in the grand scheme, reinforced her belief in the power of composure and professionalism. It also reminded her that every interaction, no matter how brief or seemingly trivial, carried potential lessons in patience, understanding, and the exercise of authority with integrity as the day went on. The woman continued her duties with unwavering focus. Each hearing, each decision, and each interaction reinforced her reputation as a fair, thoughtful, and authoritative figure. Colleagues and staff observed her with admiration, recognizing not only her legal expertise, but also her ability to handle complex situations with grace and dignity. Her example served as a quiet yet powerful reminder that true authority comes from knowledge, patience, and the consistent application of principles, rather than from assumptions or superficial displays of control. Meanwhile, the officers eventually returned to the station. They were quieter than usual, each lost in thought as they reflected on the morning's events. Their casual arrogance had been replaced by a sense of introspection. They recognized that their assumptions and actions had been flawed, and that respect and professionalism were essential. Even in routine encounters, the memory of the woman's calm authority remained with them, a subtle yet powerful lesson in humility, patience, and awareness. As the day drew to a close, the woman concluded her final hearing. She organized her notes, ensured that all documentation was properly filed, and left the courtroom with the same quiet composure she had carried throughout the day. The city outside was bathed in the warm glow of late afternoon sunlight, and she walked to her car with a sense of fulfillment and purpose. The earlier encounter with the officers had not diminished her day or her focus. If anything, it had reinforced her understanding of human behavior and the importance of patience and dignity in every situation. Driving home, she reflected on the lessons of the day. She thought about the importance of maintaining calm in the face of disrespect, of observing carefully before reacting, and of using authority responsibly and thoughtfully. Each experience, each encounter, was a reminder of the responsibilities she carried and the values she upheld. The city moved around her, full of life and activity. Yet she felt a quiet sense of control and purpose. Knowing that she had handled both her professional duties and the earlier unexpected challenge with integrity and grace, the morning incident, though minor, had set the tone for reflection and insight. It was a reminder that authority, respect, and composure are intertwined, and that every person carries the capacity to influence a situation positively or negatively. The woman's calm and measured handling of the officer's actions served as a testament to the power of patience, observation, and integrity, lessons that would resonate far beyond the brief encounter on the street. The day had been long and filled with responsibility, but it was also a day that reinforced the enduring importance of dignity, professionalism. In quiet strength in the face of challenges, the next morning brought a sense of anticipation and quiet tension. Word of the previous day's encounter had traveled through channels that the officers had not expected. Within the precinct, subtle whispers of what had happened began circulating, and while no formal complaint had yet been filed, there was an unmistakable sense that the minor incident could have serious repercussions. The officers were aware, if only dimly, that their actions had been scrutinized, and that their casual arrogance had been noted in ways they could not undo. The woman, on the other hand, was focused entirely on her work. She arrived at the courthouse early, as always, carrying her briefcase and maintaining a calm and professional demeanor. Each step she took resonated with quiet authority, her mind already reviewing the schedule for the day, the cases she would oversee, and the responsibilities that came with her role. She understood that her influence was not merely symbolic. Every decision, every action she took, had the power to affect lives and set standards for fairness and justice. Inside her chambers, she reviewed the details of her ongoing cases. Making notes and reflecting on the arguments she might encounter, she was meticulous, ensuring that nothing would catch her off guard. The incident with the officers remained in her thoughts, not as a source of frustration, but as a reminder of the need for patience and vigilance in all aspects of life. She had maintained her composure perfectly, but she knew that the memory of the event could serve as a teaching moment for those involved, if approached correctly. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, the officers were quietly anxious. The realization that they had misjudged the situation settled heavily on them. Their superiors had begun asking questions, seeking reports on the events of the previous day. The officers were aware that an internal review could be initiated, and the knowledge of the woman's position as a judge only intensified their unease. What had seemed like a minor interaction was now taking on a weight they had not anticipated. The day in the courthouse moved steadily forward. The woman presided over her hearings with the same calm and deliberate authority she always did. She listened carefully to every argument, observed the demeanor of witnesses, and asked pointed questions when clarity was needed. Her focus was unshakable, and her presence inspired respect from everyone in the room. Lawyers adjusted their approach. Witnesses felt observed in a constructive way, and the atmosphere of the courtroom was one of diligence and attention to detail. Despite the demands of her work, her thoughts occasionally drifted back to the previous incident. She considered how easily assumptions could cloud judgment and how important it was to remain aware of human behavior in all interactions. The officer's lack of foresight had been a minor disruption, but it underscored a broader lesson about respect, authority, and the consequences of misjudgment. She knew that education, accountability, and reflection were the best ways to ensure that such situations were corrected and prevented in the future. During a short break in the hearings, she reflected on her options. She could have pursued formal complaints or allowed the situation to fade into obscurity. However, she recognized that her role carried a responsibility not just to herself, but to the principles of justice and fairness. She decided that the best approach would be measured action, ensuring that the officers understood the seriousness of their conduct while maintaining professionalism and avoiding personal confrontation. The courthouse staff noticed her reflective mood but continued to respect her privacy. She returned to the bench with renewed focus, guiding proceedings with fairness and clarity. Each case was handled with meticulous attention, and her decisions reflected both legal precision and human empathy. The lessons of patience, observation, calm authority were evident in every interaction, setting an example for colleagues, staff, and the public who observed the proceedings. Meanwhile, the officers were summoned for a review meeting. Their supervisor addressed the situation, emphasizing the importance of respect, professionalism, and understanding authority. The officers were made to realize that their assumptions had been not only incorrect, but potentially damaging. They were required to write detailed reports on the incident, reflecting on their actions and the lessons learned. It was a humbling experience, one that challenged their perspective and encouraged introspection. As the day progressed, the woman continued to balance her duties with careful attention to the human dynamics around her. She was aware that leadership was not only about enforcing rules, but about modeling behavior, demonstrating patience, and maintaining composure in the face of challenges. Her ability to navigate the complex situations of the courthouse with dignity underscored the difference between authority earned through respect and compliance demanded through force. In the precinct, the officers spent hours reviewing policies, discussing the incident with colleagues, and reflecting on the consequences of their actions. The realization that their behavior had been inappropriate settled in fully, and a sense of accountability began to take root. They understood that professional conduct required more than technical skill; it required emotional intelligence, awareness, and humility. The memory of the woman's calm authority served as a silent lesson they could not ignore. The woman, throughout the day, maintained a steady focus on her responsibilities. She conducted hearings, reviewed case files, and made decisions with clarity and fairness. Her interactions with staff and colleagues were professional and courteous. Yet her presence conveyed a quiet power that inspired respect without intimidation. Every action, every word, and every gesture reflected her understanding that true authority is expressed through knowledge, patience, and integrity. During a brief moment of reflection in her office, she considered the broader implications of the morning's events. The officers' misunderstanding of authority was a small but telling example of a wider societal tendency to judge hastily, often overlooking the importance of experience, position, and composure. She understood that addressing such misjudgments required not anger or confrontation, but education, accountability, and consistent demonstration of professionalism. This approach ensured that lessons were learned constructively in respect, was reinforced without creating unnecessary conflict. By late afternoon, the hearings concluded, and the woman prepared to leave the courthouse. She walked with her usual composed demeanor, her thoughts focused on both the day's achievements and the subtle lessons embedded in everyday encounters. The city outside was busy, filled with people moving through their routines, but she carried with her a sense of purpose and calm authority. The earlier incident with the officers had not disrupted her day. It had been a minor disturbance in the flow of her responsibilities, and she had handled it with grace and patience. The officers, after the internal review and reflection, began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. They were conscious that respect and professionalism were not optional in interactions with the public, especially those in positions of authority. The incident became a point of discussion within the precinct, a teaching moment for others as well. The lessons they learned about humility, awareness, and the consequences of assumptions would shape their future conduct and interactions. Driving home, the woman considered the subtle dynamics of authority and human behavior. She reflected on the importance of patience, observation, and measured response. She knew that encounters like the one with the officers could easily escalate if handled poorly, but her calm approach had ensured that dignity and respect prevailed. The experience reaffirmed her belief that leadership is about more than titles or appearances. It is about actions, integrity, and the consistent application of fairness and wisdom, as the sun set. Casting a warm glow across the city, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The day had been long, filled with professional responsibilities and the added complexity of the earlier encounter. Yet she had navigated each moment with composure and authority. Her focus remained on the work she was entrusted with and the broader lessons she could impart through her example. The officer's misjudgment had provided a moment of reflection and teaching, reinforcing the values of respect, patience, and professionalism in ways that formal instruction often could not. By the end of the day, Both the woman and the officers had experienced lessons in their own ways. She had demonstrated the power of calm authority and the importance of handling challenges with dignity. They had confronted the consequences of assumptions and the need for respect and awareness in all interactions. The events, though minor in appearance, left a lasting impact, highlighting the ways in which human behavior, perception, and responsibility intersect in everyday life. It was a day that reinforced the enduring importance of integrity, composure, and the quiet strength that comes from understanding and exercising. True authority, the final day of the week, brought a sense of closure to the events that had begun earlier. The woman arrived at the courthouse with the same calm focus that had characterized every day of her career. She was aware that the story of the encounter with the officers had circulated quietly, yet her attention remained on the work before her. Her mind was organized, her priorities clear. She moved through the courthouse with a composed confidence that set the tone for everyone around her. The morning hearings proceeded without interruption. The woman carefully listened to each case, ensuring that every argument was heard, every piece of evidence examined, and every witness treated with fairness. Her questions were precise, her observations sharp, and her decisions reflected a careful balance of law and human impact. The courtroom responded to her presence, lawyers adjusting their behavior to match the seriousness and clarity of her authority, and witnesses offering testimony with a sense of the respect demanded by the situation. Throughout the day, she remained mindful of the broader lessons embedded in the previous encounters. The officers' actions had highlighted the importance of awareness, humility, and respect. She understood that influence was exercised not through force or intimidation, but through consistent demonstration of composure, patience, and ethical behavior. Each decision in the courtroom reinforced these principles, showing that leadership and authority are demonstrated through fair and thoughtful action rather than impulsive reaction. Outside, the city continued its daily rhythm, seemingly unaware of the quiet lessons being enacted within the courthouse. The officers, still processing the incident, were reflecting on the personal and professional implications of their behavior. They had engaged in discussions with colleagues and supervisors, acknowledging their mistakes and considering how to prevent similar situations in the future. The woman's calm authority had left a lasting impression, serving as a benchmark for conduct and professionalism that they would carry forward in her chambers. The woman prepared for the final cases of the day. She reviewed evidence, considered the legal arguments, and anticipated the questions that might arise during the hearings. Her attention to detail was meticulous, and her focus unwavering. She understood that each case, no matter how minor it seemed, had consequences for the people involved, and she approached her responsibilities with the seriousness and care they observed. The courtroom was filled with individuals from various walks of life, all seeking justice or resolution. The woman's presence brought a sense of order and clarity to the proceedings. Her calm demeanor allowed participants to feel heard and acknowledged, even in moments of tension. She guided the process with skill, ensuring that every voice was considered and every argument weighed carefully. It was a demonstration of the quiet power of authority exercised with fairness and dignity. As the hearings progressed, her thoughts occasionally returned to the officers. She considered how their actions, while misguided, could serve as an opportunity for growth and reflection. The incident was a reminder that people often act out of assumption or ignorance, and that patience and composure can turn moments of conflict into opportunities for understanding. She resolved that any follow-up regarding the officers would be handled in a way that emphasized accountability and education, rather than retribution, ensuring that the lesson was meaningful and constructive. During a brief recess, she spoke with a colleague about the ongoing cases and strategies for ensuring fairness in difficult situations. Her conversation was professional, clear, and collaborative. There was no hint of lingering frustration from the earlier incident, only a calm focus on the work at hand. Her ability to compartmentalize and address challenges with poise was evident to everyone she interacted with, reinforcing her reputation as a fair, authoritative, and compassionate figure. The afternoon hearings included complex cases that required careful attention to detail and thoughtful consideration of evidence. The woman navigated each challenge with her characteristic calm and clarity, asking insightful questions and ensuring that every perspective was understood. Her approach allowed the court to function efficiently and fairly, with participants responding to her authority not out of fear, but out of respect for her knowledge, fairness, and composure. Throughout the day, her reflections on authority and human behavior remained present. She considered how quickly assumptions could be made, how easily people could misjudge situations, and how important it was to maintain patience and perspective. The officer's earlier behavior had been a minor disruption, but it highlighted the importance of consistent, thoughtful action in every interaction. She understood that influence is most effective when exercised with integrity, empathy, and careful observation. By late afternoon, the final cases were concluded. The woman organized her notes, ensured that all documentation was in order, and prepared to leave the courthouse. Her day had been demanding, yet she had handled every challenge with poise and focus. The lessons of patience, authority, professional integrity had been demonstrated not only to those present in the courtroom, but also, indirectly, to the officers and others who had observed or heard of the earlier encounter. Outside, the city continued its activity, but the woman moved with a sense of quiet accomplishment. She understood the impact of her actions, both large and small, and the ways in which her behavior could influence others. The officers, reflecting on their experience, would carry the memory of her composure and professionalism as a reminder of the importance of respect, humility, and awareness in every situation. The encounter had become more than a minor incident. It had become a lesson in human behavior, authority, and dignity. As she drove home, she thought about the week as a whole. Each day had been filled with challenges and responsibilities, yet she had navigated them with clarity and purpose. The encounter with the officers had provided an unexpected opportunity to demonstrate patience and professionalism, and she felt a sense of fulfillment in the way she had handled it. Her focus remained on her work, her principles, and the quiet influence she could exert through integrity and consistent behavior. Arriving home, she reflected on the broader meaning of authority and respect. She recognized that true leadership is not about asserting power through force or intimidation, but about guiding, observing, and influencing through calm, consistent, and ethical action. The officer's misjudgment. It served as a reminder of the fragility of assumptions and the need for awareness and humility in all interactions. The experience, though minor in the grand scheme, had reinforced lessons that extended far beyond a single encounter. In the quiet of her home, she allowed herself a moment to relax and reflect on the day's work. She considered how patience, observation, and integrity had shaped her interactions, both in the courthouse and in the brief, unexpected confrontation on the street. The officer's actions had been a test, a challenge to her composure, and she had navigated it successfully, maintaining dignity and authority without confrontation or anger. It was a testament to the power of calm professionalism and the quiet strength of ethical leadership. The week concluded with a sense of resolution. The woman had demonstrated the value of composure, patience, and fairness, and the officers had learned lessons in respect, accountability, and humility. The encounter that had begun as a minor incident had transformed into a meaningful reflection on authority, human behavior, and the ways in which small interactions can carry profound lessons. Both parties emerged with insights that would shape future behavior, emphasizing the enduring importance of respect, integrity, and thoughtful action. As the sun set and the city settled into evening, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Her responsibilities had been met with diligence and fairness, and the lessons of the week had been reinforced through both her professional conduct and the unexpected challenges she had faced. The officers, too, would carry forward the memory of the encounter. Guided by a newfound understanding of respect, awareness, and the subtleties of authority, the story concluded not with conflict or punishment, but with reflection and growth. The woman's calm and measured approach had ensured that dignity and authority were preserved, while the officer's experience served as a humbling reminder of the consequences of assumptions and the importance of professional conduct. In the end, The encounter became more than a brief incident on a city street. It became a lasting lesson in patience, respect, and the quiet power of integrity in human interactions.